Okay, all right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast that reviews every single UK written comic that we are interested in reviewing. This is UK CORRAL. I'm your co-host, Michael. As always, I'm joined by Adamantium. Woo! That's right. Nice background, by the way. I like it.
Yes, it is Les Zoids. It is the French advertisement for it.
Nice. Good thing it translates. And then we're also joined by Paul. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Did you forget my code name?
Oh my gosh, that's right. I'm sorry. Nice man. Nice man.
Right.
Forget I said that. I don't want to give away your secret identity here.
Everyone expunge it from your memory, Doctor Strange style.
So, Nice Man, you actually missed our first Zoids episode, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so are you familiar with this franchise?
I was vaguely before, now I am more so.
Okay, so you didn't have any Zoids as a kid, is that what you're saying?
I would have returned them.
Okay.
For cash.
So if we look at the background on Adam's wall behind him, I don't think I see the one that I had, but I had one that was basically a Brontosaurus. And it was sitting on my desk for my entire childhood. It was a really nice toy. You had to put it together yourself, then you wound it up and it could walk. It was very cool. The thing is I was never motivated to go on and buy more. So obviously it wasn't that cool, right? But it was cool to have that one Zoid.
Well, I think they were also cost prohibitive, though, because you look at the cost of what these things would have entailed, even in the ads behind me, which is flipped, so you can't really see the pricing. But unfortunately, these things were quite expensive, even compared to like some of the other big name toys of the era, like your Ninja Turtles or your Transformers. In fact, they didn't really sell these, I think, at a lot of toy stores, but more like Radio Shacks as projects for people to assemble. And I guess the closest thing, just as a comparison for this day and age, is maybe something like Lego Mindstorms, where the idea is you will be able to build something and program it to operate so it can move and make him just kind of like rotate its arms or whatever. The difference being Lego Mindstorms, people are able to create a multitude of different sort of machinations with it. Here, it's just you have your prefab parts, and so you can only assemble said Zoid. But kind of an interesting take. It's not a transformer, but a trans builder. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Kind of, yeah. And again, it's funny because on first glance, I would think it's not something that could be adapted into a really interesting comic. However, just like G.I. Joe and Transformers, if you get a good writer in there, you can do anything, right? So Adam and
this brings up a question, though, Mike.
Sure.
Like, what's your opinion on this? I was reading this and I thought, did they make these comics just to sell toys?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think that, to be honest, most superhero comics, I mean, they're not. I mean, what are they really? You know, they're all commercial properties.
Excellent
right?
narratives and art, of course.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, it is meant to sell product. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I mean, we're talking about the same thing here, I think. But in any case, let's just dive into it and we'll kind of comment as we go along here. Okay. So I'll talk about the first one. Now, we should point out that these were only available in the UK, not in the US. So we never got to read these when we were kids, Adam, Auntie, and myself. So this series appeared in a comic called Spider-Man and Zoids. Now, for some reason, Zoids, the logo here is much bigger than Spider-Man. I don't know why, but whatever. So we have our cover here, which features Spider-Man, because there's 3 stories in each one of these comics. One is Zoids, one is Spider-Man, and one is Strike Force Mortuary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or some of them later on are Avengers, but this is Strike Force Mortuary. Anyway, okay, so in this story, again, we're going back a week here, folks, so this is a lot for me to remember, okay? But again, on first glance, if you took out, you know, there's a rule that you're supposed to be able to follow the story without the narration, the dialogue. There isn't a lot going on, so I think the enjoyment I get from these stories is the way that Grant Morrison writes them, not necessarily the action that's happening in them. And so I've read 20 of these stories, and I still don't know if they're good guys and bad guys, if they're both bad, if they're both good. Do you know, Adam?
As far as I know, it was ambiguous, and I think that was part of the initial marketing campaign.
Okay.
It was just blue side, red side. That was it. And then that's why we have the human characters intervening. They're kind of the moral compass, and we don't really have a good or bad side. We just have the humans caught between this seemingly pointless war.
Gotcha. So, okay, so we're opening up with this again. Grant Morrison is writing this, so he's kind of giving this analogy about about how different cultures have a different concept of how the world will end, and he gives, I think it's 3 different examples, and they're all really. I'll just read one of them. On Gadrock, the Yai, a super intelligent microorganism colony that inhabits a water droplet on the hull of a derelict spacecraft, believe that the end will come when the sun rises, evaporating their entire universe. And so he gives these examples, and it's just a way of kind of setting up that the Zoids have their own, on Zoidstar, they have their own idea, and it's just a very cool way of just introducing a very simple conflict between these 2 toys, which is all they really are, right? But that's okay. And so we kind of join this story in the middle of this ongoing battle, just like the Autobots and the Decepticons, right? But after this, what happens in this battle is Zoidzilla, who's one of the larger ones, who's basically Godzilla, looks like Godzilla or like some type of Tyrannosaurus Rexish type character, ends up kind of getting killed. And so then along come now, Zoidzilla is a blue Zoid, and along come 2 red Zoids. And they are piloted by 2 humans, I believe, right?
I'm not clear on that. I know the humans appear thereafter. I think from what we see in the comics, just the 2 red Zoids have a comment, and they kind of walk by the fallen body of the Mega Super Ultra Zoid. And and then we see the 2 humans and their friend Namer, who is a synthoid of some type, I believe.
Right. Not a very creative name, just calling him Namer, but whatever. Okay, fine. So then, so they're kind of just chatting it up here. And then just at that moment, another army of Zoids all come in, right? And
a stampede of Zoids, yes.
A stampede of Zoids, right. And while this is happening, just like in Transformers, the humans are minuscule, ineffective, but they're kind of our window into the story. And so they're kind of watching what's going on and talking about it. And just as they're talking, now again, this is only a 7-page story. At the end of this story, the cliffhanger is that there's this new giant Zoid called, I believe later on they call it the Black Zoid, right?
Racist.
Yeah. So that's the cliffhanger of this new Zoid that also kind of looks like Godzilla, but it has like little horns on its face.
It's a horny Godzilla, yeah.
Yeah. So there isn't really much to talk about, but since Paul has not, this is his first time talking about a Zoid story. Paul, why don't you tell us what you thought of this initial chapter here?
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
You enjoyed it?
I thought it was a miracle.
Okay.
Because, it really makes the point, and I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. It really makes the point. A good writer can make anything good.
Yes.
And I have zero interest in Zoids, zero. And if somebody really had ever bought me such a thing, I'm sure I would have broken it very quickly.
Zero, on purpose.
Zero on purpose. Zero patience. Put it together and all this. And so, Zoids. Did I feel excited? No.
Okay.
I'd almost rather review the entire body of Dazzler, meaning the comics, not the...
Okay.
And then I read like the first couple of pages and I'm like, no, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it good? Because it's Grant Morrison. And immediately his intelligence shows through. Immediately. Mm-hmm. He knows it's just some, dopey toys and this and that. And it's almost like an what can we say? Analogy for soccer hooliganism. 2 groups of fans.
Sure.
We're to try and keep the red fans and the blue fans. But, I mean, if somebody really wants to pick it apart and say, no, Grant Morrison's kind of stupid, they could if they want to. But I think that 9 writers out of 10 would have done this purely painting by numbers. Do you know what I mean? Purely just hacked it out. But as you said before, it's not really what's going on with the Zoids. It's the way he writes it. The touches of intelligence, the reflections of character. And I'm trying to think of some good examples. The first one about the droplet of water. okay, on the surface of things, you could say, oh, that's kind of dopey. But it's not. It's a comic book. And that's what it's supposed to be, you know, a leap of faith, a leap of fantasy. And I think maybe nobody does it better than him. So immediately I was struck by that. Immediately. Okay, this is not just your run-of-the-mill rock'em sock'em robots. You know, no, this has got a nice, already an intelligent touch to it that makes you think. And then it immediately made me think of other Grant Morrison stuff, like All-Star Superman, which was absolutely tremendous. I think every issue was tremendous. And also his 4-issue Flex Mentallo.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Right? He loves dealing with worlds within worlds. And that's what this is. It's a droplet of water. It's a world within a world. And that's just such a great touch. The last thing I'll say before I should turn it back over to you is, you know, he criticized Alan Moore, some of Alan Moore's work, because Alan Moore goes into reality. What if the superheroes inhabited our world, real world? How would it be? How would they act? How would they be regarded? And he said, I don't want to read that. I don't want them to coming into our world. I want to go into their world. And that's why he's so good for a dopey series like Zoids, because he brings that touch, that freshness, that intelligence, and the characterization. So I was so pleasantly, happily surprised, you know?
Wow, couldn't have said it better myself. Adamantium, what do you think?
Well, I think it's very interesting. And just to follow up with Paul, there is this thing that Morrison has done throughout their bibliography, which is working within certain IPs or certain established franchises and just using that as a catalyst to write whatever they want to. It's a thing where maybe they want to talk about existential thought. Maybe they want to mull over some philosophy that's come their way, or perhaps they have certain political or social issues that they want to address. You know, I kind of see the comic baseline as just an excuse to pontificate on this. And when I say pontificate, that seems like a loaded term, but I mean in the best possible sense. There's a lot of great musing on these. And, you know, I think Paul really nailed it on the head when you're talking about that droplet of water, a world within worlds. And really the conceit of this very short story, which isn't a complete story, it's a continuation, a setup for a big battle, but it's that whole notion of how the end of things from a distance, from an outsider's perspective, seems so obvious, but it seems impossible given your immediacy in the situation. And there's something very profound about that, especially within the setting of conflict and war. That, to me, is what makes the writing of Morrison so incredible for this series. And then there's the practical side of me, which wonders, since this is primarily a vehicle for which to sell toys, I did some research on this because I was a bit curious. This super mega villain Zoid that appears at the very end of the comic has no toy equivalent. It is just made for the series.
Right.
Which on one hand, I appreciate it being very bold and brazen. And on the other hand, I also wonder, how the editors got away with that? Because I could imagine that disrupted like a lot of households for children who really wanted that Zoid. They're like, Mumsy, buy me the Zoid. And then Mum was like, well, okay, where do I find it? Where do I find it? This damn thing isn't anywhere. So that is just, it's not a critique. It's just a kind of a funny observation I noticed about this introduction of this big bad in the end of this issue. But with that said, yeah, the writing is good. And, you know, I don't think we commented on the art. It's very hard to get dynamics for robots and for automatons. Like, you do get a sense of movement and you get a sense of precision with the way that these robots are illustrated. And so as much as we've been talking about Grant Morrison and their incredible writing, Kev Hopgood did the pencils for this, and the inks by Dave Hine, I think, were absolutely fantastic. The coloring grew on me as the series progressed. It looks like it was Stuart Place who did the coloring for it. There's almost like this very faint painted aspect to it, which gives it a very kind of washed out feel, which I appreciate. Like, the sun's been beating down on this planet for so long that everything is just kind of like saturated, almost bleached. But yeah, I think it all adds to this giant gestalt of something that I'm just going to second Paul. It's a miracle. It shouldn't work. Yeah, it does.
You know, I will say I obviously do love the writing here, but I don't think the art is great. The art by Kev Hopgood. And you mentioned how it's kind of difficult to make robots look dynamic. The Transformers series, which I was obsessed with as a kid, had some good art and had some pretty bad art. Now, Don Perlin was one of the main artists. Rest in peace. He just died. He was not a good artist on Transformers, but there were some good ones. William Johnson was great. Paul, I think it was Alan Kupperberg was great. Jose Delbo was good. So there is a way to make them look good, and I just don't think this is. I mean, if you just flip through the pages, it just. I don't think the panel layouts are dynamic. I don't think the figures look great. Like the humans, you can see it's easier to judge the humans. I just don't think he draws faces that well. We can see here with the two guys sitting there with the guns.
The art is going to decline a little bit in the next issue, especially. I do feel, though, when we get away from the human figures and just focus on the robots, there is something where I am going to at least appreciate the fact that the robots do have some dynamism. They have a little bit of kineticness, which is so hard for... Well, Mike, you had one of these toys. They're a big block of plastic that has a few gears that make their legs move. To actually get a sense of expression from any of these things is pretty incredible. So I do want to give the artist credit for that.
Sure, okay. Expression, yes, that is nearly impossible for a robot. I'll give you that. But okay, so you know what? I agree with everything you guys have said, and we already reviewed the first batch, and I knew these would be good, but they were actually much better than I thought that they would be. So now we're gonna go. Oh, look at this! We got an ad here for. What is this? Krark. This is Krark, the Prince of Darkness, and Gore, the Lord Protector. Isn't that cool? So, Paul, you're saying this doesn't make you want to buy them, this ad here? No, eh?
You know, when you were talking about kids' toys, I thought, what were my kids' toys? Meaning me as a kid, not my kid.
Okay.
And they were all the Thunderbirds. They were tremendous. Thunderbird 5. And I'm thinking, it must have cost my relatives a lot of money when they used to bring them over at Christmas and Easter. So all the Thunderbirds, those kind of toys, really, and the cars, the Batmobile, and, Green Hornet car, and shooting rockets and other stuff like that. So these guys, Transformers, Zoids, no. They're...
Well, there's always going to be a generation gap, understandable. But I was obsessed with Transformers as a kid. That was my number one thing. What was your number one thing, Adam?
Probably the same, because I was really in that age range when it came out, and it appealed. You like dinosaurs, you like monsters, you like robots, you like being able to manipulate things with your hands. If you're a kid who's a builder, who's into Legos or something like that, like Transformers was like the nexus for all these things intersecting. So it was really between that and Godzilla films for me as a child.
Oh, I'm there with you right there, Godzilla films. Okay, so now we're going to jump to number 41, Spider-Man and Zoids. And Adam, you're going to tell us what happened in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to do a in-depth synopsis, but what I will say is we're opening here on a page where we see an assemblage of Zoids who look like they're preparing in a flank to march out. And they're actually about to march out against the Black Zoid, which is finally named. And this is piloted by Silverman, who we actually encountered in our last talk about Zoids, which was another 10-issue spread, I believe, or something along those lines.
Spread out, yeah.
Yeah, which was an android adversary of the main human character. And we did see a glimpse that Silverman was compiling this sort of Gestalt Zoid, this giant mutant that was going to annihilate everyone, including our main human protagonist. So anyway, what I find one issue with Morrison's writing, a bit of a cliche, but I'm sure this was editorial mandate. The Black Zoid, piloted by Silverman, gives a warning saying, "You have until this time, and then I'm coming to kill you." You could have just killed him right then, but his Zoid scampers away, and with that, it gives our heroes time to prepare for retaliation. So they actually drag this decrepit body of Zoidzilla to their base in the hopes to repair it. We see a huge page in which these giant mechanical arms are trying to fuse and somehow rebuild Zoidzilla, but they're struggling because they don't have all the technology or components prepared for it. And that's including Zoidzilla's memory tank, which is leaking, which is going to compromise the existence of this thing. And this actually answers a question I had, because I had some conflicting thoughts that I don't think I addressed in the last run of Zoids, whether these were sentient creatures or they were just automatons like giant mechs piloted by aliens or people. And here it's showing it's kind of a combination. They're essentially a symbiotic sort of race that coexist in the mind with their pilots. So that answers that question, which I thought was pretty interesting. Anyway, suddenly everyone has to run out of the base because it's Silverman back with the Black Zoid. He's coming back to enact his revenge, and he starts blasting at the Zoids that are just encroached around the area, including this one who's in a Triceratops Zoid of some sort. Anyway, he blasts it. The pilot is emerging. He's engulfed in flames, and it's really giving this horrific image as he is just incinerated, showing the devastation that's going to ensue. We do see a close-up of Silverman himself, just this gnarled synthoid with all of these pipes and different cords running out from him into the body of the giant Zoid he's piloting. And of course, what happens? Well, the final shot is our hero, our human piloting a Stegosaurus Zoid, about to engage with Silverman and the Black Zoid in battle, and that's how we end that issue.
I have a question, if I may ask.
Sure.
Did Grant Morrison inherit this character named Silverman, or did he name him?
That's a good question. I don't know, because the issues we read, Adam, you know?
I do, because we actually read Grant Morrison's beginning run on Zoids, so he did take the mantle from other writers. They took the mantle from other writers. So I just want to say that yes, the Silverman character, the human characters, these were all established before Morrison came on, so it wasn't their creation.
Every time I read the name Silverman, I kept thinking of a former president of NBC.
Okay. Yeah, these names are very basic. Silverman, Namer, Heller, right?
That's the name of the human protagonist. I kept forgetting it. Heller, yes.
Right, Heller, yeah. Not very creative, but again, Grant Morrison does a lot with these characters. Again, this story is very straightforward, but it's what Grant Morrison does with these characters. Even just the scene of them repairing Zoidzilla. I love this scene because I love the idea that, like you said, Adam, if these Zoids are sentient, then it's just interesting, like in Transformers, where you have robots that can think and feel, but you're still able to fix them as if they're just a car, right? I just think that's a fascinating concept. So, yeah, I mean, what else can I say? I really like this issue. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I like every one of them.
So did I. Yeah. Okay.
Even if it, and I feel almost like shy to admit it, you know. 'Cause, I mean, I hope not too many people listening to me say I enjoyed every issue of Zoids that Grant Morrison wrote, because he always gives a little something extra, and for me that's the history of what makes one writer better than another. In
that's a great point.
Regular comic book reading history, it was always that way. Like with Steve Gerber, you know, Don McGregor, Jim Starr, Steve Englehart, they always gave you something extra above and beyond to, you know, what was going on, and that's what Grant Morrison always strives to do. Maybe doesn't always succeed, but typically he does. At least he aims for it. You know, and I think I looked at, to jump ahead, I looked at the first post-Grant Morrison Zoids, and I thought, oh, immediately it's just run-of-the-mill. Immediately.
Number 51, you mean, right?
Yes, yeah.
Right, yeah. You know, it's funny, I believe, Adam, was it Richard Allen? The same writer that did the very, very, very first Zoid story. And although it's not nearly as good as Grant Morrison, I was surprised how good even that was. So I don't know, maybe I'm just easily impressed. But no, definitely not as good as Grant Morrison's writing. I'll definitely agree with that. And this also makes me think that, wow, because I loved Transformers growing up, if I would have read these comics when I was a kid, I'm sure I would have just loved these as well. And they would have really, really stood out, you know?
And you know, he does something with the characters, doesn't he? In even little ways, whether it's character interaction, whether it's some kind of character relationships, something in the dialogue, even in this short space, in this very limited kids' toy comic, he still does something that makes you interested in the characters.
Agree. I agree. Yep. And that's the thing is, in the last 5 years or so, I've been marathoning Bronze Age comics because I'm selling off most of my collection. I'm trying to reread them before I sell them. Not an easy task. Not an easy task. What are you thinking, Paul? I see you shaking your head there. What are you thinking?
Occasionally, these dark thoughts have crossed my mind.
Oh, okay. So you're saying you have not tried to sell any of your old Bronze Age comics?
Well, because then some kind of pseudo schizophrenia kicks in and has a conversation with me and says, you know, this is part of your childhood, part of your youth. You know, just that alone, you've had them this long, including Hulk 181.
Interesting.
Why on earth would you give them up? And then I say, well, I'm not going to read them again. I mean, come on. My interests these days are, you know, expanding the driveway and getting a new toilet. But
yeah.
No, this is part of me. I so wish I had managed to hold on to all my corgi cars with my Monkey Mobile and Batmobile, Man from Uncle Car, my Thunder. I wish I'd held on to all of these things. And I don't have them. So at least I have these. So why am I going to give them up? When I hear people saying, oh, yeah, I sold mine, and I just read them in trade paperbacks. No, you've given up your history. You know, I mean, is there some desperate need for this? I feel like I'm counseling. I'm counseling here.
I feel like I'm witnessing an intervention right now.
Here's the thing. One thing I'll say is that I'll never sell my Transformers and G.I. Joe comics because I've had them longer. My Transformers comics take up about this much space, and my G.I. Joes take about that much. So in the overall scheme of things, it's not a lot. However, when you have 20 long boxes of stuff that you've had since you were a kid, then it becomes a problem. So I don't think there was anything wrong with narrowing it down, but obviously some comics I do regret selling. But at the end of the day, I've had this discussion many, many times up here, and I think I've made the right one. But that's a conversation for another day, right? Because we got to talk about Zoids, right, guys?
You have to talk about CORRAL.
Yeah. So now we're going to jump to Spider-Man and Zoids, number 42. And this is actually a rare occasion where it looks like Zoids takes the cover here, the cover spotlight. Although it's kind of hard to tell because it's kind of ambiguous. But yeah. So anyway, Adam, you're going to talk about what happens in number 42.
Sure, I'll do it. We're introduced to Quark or Crack or Krark. I'm not sure.
I think it's Krark. Krark.
It's
yeah.
Krark. Okay, it's not Crack, but he is the Prince of Darkness, which is basically a renaming of this sort of pterodactyl Zoid. Anyway, he's flying overhead, pontificating about how the world is all his and it falls under his gaze, and he's witnessing the fallout of this battle that happens with the Black Zoid, the one piloted by Silverman, and the chaos that's ensuing, including different sort of liaisons and sort of, I guess you could say, machinations occurring between different Zoids. For example, there's the treacherous Mammoth who is trying to have some sort of, I guess, engagement with a Brontosaurus Zoid, perhaps trying to form an alliance. Regardless, though, we get a lot more dialogue coming from Krark. I'll never be able to pronounce their name. Anyway, with that said, our pterodactyl friend continues flying overhead, and I do love this. He swoops by Mammoth while screaming out his name, automatopoeia style, Krark!
Yeah. Good point.
So he loves his brand. I appreciate that. Anyway, as Heller is out, about to engage with the Black Zoid helmed by Silverman, the other humans are engaged again with continuing to rebuild Zoidzilla, and the son of Heller is really facing a dilemma. He wants to help his father, but he doesn't know what to do, and we're getting this sort of thread that's going to come back around by the end of this issue. Anyway, we see all the attempts to fight the Black Zoid are futile. Regardless of what is thrown at him, he always manages to persevere, even with this. And this was one of the more popular Zoids, Gore, the Lord Protector, something along that line was its name. It's a giant gorilla. He just like decks the Black Zoid, which is pretty funny, giving one of my favorite sound effects through the punch, thrung.
Thrung, yeah.
But anyway, it looks like our Black Zoid is down for the count, except it's just his carapace that's damaged. Apparently, this has multiple forms, and he emerges with a gigantic scythe on its arm, and he decapitates Gore. Again, the heroes back within the base, the humans, along with Namor, are just discussing how futile everything seems. They're trying to rebuild Zoidzilla, but everything appears like it will not be able to take. And then the battle continues outside, where unfortunately we see that Heller is about to be crushed by the Black Zoid, just as a mace is about to come down and crush him with inside of his device. We are witnessing a gigantic explosion of light, giving another great sound effect, shakoom! And that's the end of the issue.
Right. And yeah, I'm just going to jump in and say I love this opening with Krark. I am Krark, Prince of Darkness. I see everything. Up here where the air is as thin as blue gauze, brushing the intangible ceilings of the planet with my wings. Nothing is hidden from my gaze. Again, this is a toy. It wasn't even a successful toy. It was a failed toy. We don't even know how many people bought these things. But look how much imagination Grant Morrison injects into this opening scene with this character, just to make this character unique, right? Just to give us a different perspective, because this character is able to fly above everything. Just that little touch. Because again, if you took out all this narration, what is it? It's just a shot of a toy flying over a battle between a bunch of other toys, right? So the actual action that's happening, the plot, it's not what's great about it. It's how we're taken through this plot by Grant Morrison, I think, that makes it so great. So Paul, once again, we want to hear your thoughts on this story. What do you think?
Oh, well, you really don't need to hear any of my thoughts from that, because they're all the same now. Because what you just said is exactly right. Again, in the hands of just the average writer, that would just be a toy flying over and some brief exposition or something. But it's not. Grant Morrison says, screw it, he's going to do what he wants to do to make it interesting to him. And he does. And he elevates it much higher than it kind of deserves to be elevated. You know? He's too good for this. You know that, right?
Well, I mean, people used to say the same thing about Alan Moore, that Alan Moore was too good for comics. I understand your point, but I think I wish all comics were this great. Put it that way, you know?
Well, maybe it's just that Alan Moore is too good for this particular franchise.
Yeah, that could be it. You're right.
Oh, you mean Grant Morrison?
You mean Grant Morrison or Alan Moore, Adam?
Well, for this franchise.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would feel about Alan Moore writing Zoids. There'd be a lot more gore, I'm sure. Yes.
No, I mean, really great writers like these two, they can write just about anything.
I agree.
You know, they're like a film director who says, give me your worst script, like Orson Welles with Touch of Evil, you know, which was Badge of Evil. Give me your worst script. Okay, now it's great.
Or Howard Hawks with, I believe it was To Have and Have Not, I think. Yep. It was, geez, I wish I could remember. Was it Ernest Hemingway? He said, give me your worst novel. And he turns it into To Have and Have Not, the film. So, yeah, it's a great challenge. Yep. But anyway, yeah. Okay, so we're just going to jump to the next one because we all agree this is another great chapter, right?
I think it's really good. I think the introduction of this Krark fellow is really intriguing. One thing I do want to point out, I think it's interesting now to have another narrator occurring. It is an omniscient, like, third person. It isn't one of the humans. It is a Zoid. What I find very interesting, too, with Krark is that while all the other Zoids seem to be in symbiosis with a pilot, it doesn't seem that Krark is. And I wonder, I'm going to discuss this in a future issue, but if this comes to play for its character later on.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to jump. Oh, here we go. Look, we got an advertisement for Gore. You guys can't see my screen, can you?
I see everything on your screen, naughty boy.
Yeah, I can share my screen, but I think it'll screw up what we're recording. So you just have to use your imagination here. However, one thing we didn't point out is that this battle between Gore and Zoidzilla brought echoes of Godzilla vs. King Kong, right? That's what I thought of.
I'm sure that's the exact reason why they had a giant gorilla mech battling it.
Right. Okay. So now we're going to jump to Spider-Man and Zoids, number 43. I'm going to talk about this one. We've got, this is not a reprint of an American cover. This is an original UK cover of a bunch of people singing Christmas carols and Spider-Man's hanging upside down, which is very cool. But anyway, we're going to jump to the Zoid story. So we open up with, again, continuing the battle between Gore and what's the Stegosaurus's name again?
Well, it's the Black Zoid, and I don't remember the Stegosaurus's name, but it's the one that's piloted by Heller.
Right. So they're going back and forth. They're still fighting. Then we cut inside. And again, none of us are really overly familiar with the whole lore of the Zoids. But while most of them are piloted by humans, there are these androids. And so they're showing like different androids working. And looks like they're talking about Zoidzilla. And one of the androids is like, well, his android pilot, however, still needs a great deal of work. So not only are they able to repair the actual Zoids, they're able to repair the android pilots, which is kind of cool. Oh, and is this a different artist? Oh, this is Steve Yeowell. Is that how you pronounce his name? Right. And what's he famous for again? I can't remember.
Is it lots of stuff.
Invisibles?
The first Invisibles. Season 1.
Sure.
Issue 1. The very first Invisibles, which he co-did with Grant Morrison, of course. Also with Grant Morrison, Sebastian O.
Yes, right. Got that. Yep.
Yes, and Zenith was the first one he did with Grant Morrison in British Comics. I think he may have been the artist too for a strip that got Grant Morrison in trouble, but it shouldn't have gotten him in trouble because it wasn't meant to be literal in the slightest, called The New Adventures of Hitler.
Yes, I remember that.
Hitler was in somebody's closet.
Yep.
But it wasn't, it's not literal.
Sure.
I think he did that as well. No, Steve Yeowell, by now he's been around for a long time. But yes, I was very interested to see Steve Yeowell doing this. This is early Steve Yeowell, and I thought, I wonder, does it seem like early? Because remember David Lloyd, what we said about his early stuff. And I thought it was pretty decent.
Well, yeah, I'll talk more about the art later, but yeah, I'm just going to quickly summarize the story here. And so we're cutting in between the battle between Heller and, is it Silverman, Adam?
It's Silverman. Yeah.
Silverman piloting these two Zoids, and we're getting the point of view from inside the Zoid as well as the external battle. And again, if you're just looking at the action, it's a pretty straightforward toy comic of just bad guys fighting good guys or red guys fighting blue guys. And again, we end on another cliffhanger. And now the Black Zoid is being confronted by the newly repaired Zoidzilla, right? So that's the big cliffhanger for this one. And so again, it's not really so much the action; it's more of just how we're taken through the action by the different characters, right? But
Mike, I just want to intervene because there is a very significant plot point that you unfortunately omitted, which is that the Zoidzilla, they were not able to repair the android pilot, so it's actually being piloted by Heller's son.
Yes, right, which will come more into play later, right?
Yes.
Right, correct. So that's kind of like you mentioned the dilemma that he had last issue. Now he's decided how to solve that dilemma by kind of taking matters into his own hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, again, it's actually an interesting story. Like they create a problem and then the hero has to overcome it. So it's very cool. Now I want to talk about this art because in this opening page, which you guys can't see, but just use your imagination, we're opening up on a close-up of. Is this Silverman's face? I think.
No, that's Heller. That's Heller. Blood coming down his face. Yeah.
And then kind of zooming out to a medium shot. Then we're seeing him inside the cockpit, and then it's a long shot. Then we're looking over the shoulder of Black Zoid, or what is it called again?
The Black Zoid, yeah.
Black Zoid. And again, just the use of blacks, not negative space, but like silhouette is nice. The close up of the android talking uses almost like a 1950s style background where they just take black and they just shade in. Like it doesn't, that's not how real light would look, but who cares? It's a comic book and you're supposed to draw it like a comic book, right? When we get the close-up of the sun, that to me is a Steve Yeowell face. I love that close-up of his face as he's thinking about what he's going to do. I love it. And then, the battle with when we cut back to the battle, there's a lot of nice shots, like some nice composition, just flipping back and forth with different angles and being close, being far. So again, this is a comic book. That's what you got to do. We get zoomed right into one of the guys' faces. It's really nice. So in my opinion, this is definitely the best art so far. And that's all I'll say about this. And now we're going to hear from Paul. What do you think, Paul?
This is the usual story.
Okay.
It's I liked the way he never took his eye off the importance of individual characterization with actions and words. And again, this is within just 7 pages or so. Oh, there's very limited space for him. He's got to do a large part of painting by numbers. He's got to do that. The blues have to fight the reds, and the big one has to come along, and this and that. But still, the touches of individuality and the touches in the relationships, they just make it enjoyable. It's beyond Zoids. It's beyond clash of blue and red and black and whatever.
Well, and also, I've talked about this before in other podcasts, but modern decompression does tend to drive me crazy. And what makes this, as you said, even more remarkable is that we're only talking about 6-7 pages here per chapter, but there's enough there to suck you in and make you want to read more, right? Which is, it's part of the medium. It's like it doesn't matter if you have 3 pages or 30 pages. You're supposed to tell a complete enough story that you feel satisfied and that you want to read more. A lot of times with modern comics, you'll read like 100-page run and you'll kind of feel like when you get to the end of the issue, it's more like they just ran out of pages. But there's no sense of closure, and there's nothing to suck you in for the next one, right?
Yeah, again, as you've said about some other things, that's like a whole other discussion, isn't it? Really, like, are we being unfair to more modern day comics? But I don't think so. That would be a very interesting discussion. Put your finger on one thing about modern comics that doesn't have what comics used to have. But then again, we'd be accused of being, I don't know, what word would you use? Like get off my lawn kind of thing? Sure,
or old men yelling at cloud. But there is, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of great modern comics, but there is something lost when you can't, not only can you not tell a story in 22 pages, good luck telling a story in 6 pages, right? Which I don't think most writers could do now. But anyway, we're going to jump to the next issue. This is Spider-Man and Zoids number 44. And once again, we get Zoids on the cover. Griff's the pilot of Zoidzilla's Slaughter. So look at that, taking the cover away from Spider-Man. Quite the accomplishment. Okay, so Adamantium, would you like to tell us what you remember happening in this one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about what happens here. Basically, we get the big fight, the thing that these issues have been leading up to, which is Heller's son, which is Griff. He is piloting the big Zoidzilla to battle the Black Zoid. And we should mention the art returns to Kev Hopgood, so you do notice a bit of a decline in the art quality. Again, I will compliment the sort of dynamics that happen with the robots, but there is a noticeable decline. Anyway, Zoidzilla is piloted by Griff, who is having a conflict because their mind is kind of melding with the mind of Zoidzilla. Again, these are sentient artificial life forms, and they work in symbiosis with their pilots. The androids probably were perfectly programmed to cooperate with this, but a human being is not. And so you have this thing where his mind is slowly being invaded and taken over by Zoidzilla, which is probably the most intriguing thing about this particular issue. There appears to be a death blow issued to the Black Zoid. However, much like before, he emerges in another form, an insectoid form, from the damaged carapace. And again, Silverman flies away to continue battle, taking to the air in this insectoid form and lasering the head of Zoidzilla, where, of course, Griff is piloting, meaning that Zoidzilla is down, it is collapsing, and we are left to presume that Griff has passed away. Of course, we see human onlookers from the station that they had repaired Zoidzilla in, looking on in abject horror, not knowing what's going to happen. They're hoping they can use a giant cannon to deal a death blow to the Black Zoid, but so far nothing is capable. So we have the body of Griff on the ground, and Heller, despite having all these massive injuries from his own Zoid being damaged, walks towards his son. He's blasted by a ray of flame emitted from the Black Zoid, but he just removes his leather jacket and stands by his son, basically mouthing off to the Black Zoid and Silverman, telling him, "Why don't you go shove it?" Which is such a Harrison Ford moment. I really appreciate that. And then afterwards, what happens? We hear my favorite sound of all time, Krark, as Krark and an assemblage of both blue and red Zoids united come together to do battle with the Black Zoid. And that's how we end off that issue. I just want to give my 2 cents on this.
Sure.
Because I didn't really talk about the previous issue too much. I just want to say I was conflicted because I love the characterization we had from Heller. He's describing these memories of being in a storm when he's a child and having to go inside this box, basically this tornado basement, this sanctuary away from the storm, and how he's reminiscing of that while he's in this damaged Zoid. But the whole point of that issue was just to lead up to his son piloting the Zoidzilla. So it seemed like it was a lot for like one payoff, but this really shows a lot. It shows the struggle that he's going through witnessing his son potentially dying. It shows the struggles that Griff is going through piloting this alien technology where his mind is being taken over, and yet he's doing it out of the sense of obligation, of love to protect his father. You see this sort of sense of hopelessness as everyone looks on, seeing that the Black Zoid seems unstoppable, and then this big hurrah moment as the United Zoid Front comes in at the end, the old red and blue. I think this was a great setup for a final battle. It is one of those fist-pumping panels at the end. You really do feel invigorated that you want to see a big action sequence, which is very hard to do sometimes when it comes to this medium, but it works. And it works again because the writing is good, we get characterization, despite the fact that these human characters, which normally in the midst of these giant monster, giant mech fandoms are usually the least interesting of the aspects, I'm invested. I want to see what's going to happen. And because of that, I thought this was a really great issue narratively, marred by not only a decline in the art because we returned to the previous artist, but I think this is some of the weakest art that they've actually had so far in their run.
I'll agree with that. It's not great. Yeah, I'll agree. Paul, what did you think about this one?
Same. Isn't it terrible? Just imagine if I sat here the entire time and I just said the same. I wanted to say about Kevin Hopgood. I believe he had a run on Iron Man. Do you remember that?
Oh, in the 90s? Yeah, after maybe around the time War Machine was introduced. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. And I really wasn't too. I used to be interested in Iron Man for its own sake. Then after I read the Michelini, Romita Layton stuff and Michelini Bright Layton, after that I was interested because it was never as good. And so when I saw Kevin, I think he you know what? I think he may have drawn issues of Iron Man, but I'm pretty sure he drew, like you said, War Machine.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I thought, no.
Well,
the art.
It was
So-
a rough time in the 90s because most of the really good artists would have migrated to Image, right? Because that's what they're paying so much more money there.
Yeah, but even then, some of the Image artists could be criticized and still are, aren't they?
Oh, I'm not gonna argue with that. Yeah, 100%. You're right. You're right.
But what a deal to be paid more money to only produce 6 issues a year. I mean, no wonder so many were sucked up by Image.
That. Yeah, if that, right.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I thought this issue was great. We see the human sacrifice and like the human relationships, right? Which is a one way to do it if you're talking about aliens or robots or toys, basically. Now you did mention the sound effect that you liked, Adam Clark, but you missed the cameo appearance by another sound effect, and that's snicked. Did you notice that?
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up. I can't believe I overlooked a snicked.
Yeah, there you go, snicked. And then we also get another Zoids ad at the end of this issue that shows Zed-Ray or Z-Ray if you're American, Zark, Krark, Zaton, Zunder, very creative here, Gore, Tarantulan, Terra Red, and Slime. The Zord wars have reached new heights of destruction and ferocity. See the new Zoids in your local toy shop now. Tomy. There you go.
I love these ads. The battle continues. The war wages on. You can have your own existential crisis with piloting your Zoids.
Yep. Okay, so now we're going to jump to Spider-Man Zoids number 45. I don't remember whose turn it is, Adam. Is it me or you?
I will let you take the helm of this one, and I think you'll be delighted to see Steve Yeowell returns for our pencils on this one.
Yes, that's right. So we're in the middle of this battle. We've got the what do they call it? The United Zoid Army is now battling the Black Zoid, right?
Yep.
It's hard to keep track. So again, it's not about what's actually happening in the action. It's about the narration, I guess you'd call it. By Grant Morrison. And for the first time in history, red and blue Zoids have joined forces in the metallic skies of Zoidstar to follow Krark's example. The words of ancient legend, the dreams of Krark, the schemes of Silverman all come together like pieces of a vast jigsaw puzzle, revealing a picture of the future. It's great stuff, right? Like again, even if it is just for kids, if I was a kid, I would have ate this up. I would have loved it, right? So anyway, meanwhile, the Black Zoid is seemingly destroyed, but again, a different form emerges. And now, what would you call this? It's almost like a bee, like not a crab, sort of like a crab.
It's got like little chicken legs.
Yeah, it's got chicken legs, but it has claws and then bigger claws. So I don't know what it is. It's a toy. It's another toy, right? Yeah.
Exactly. A toy that you can't buy.
Mm-hmm. And so I love how then I'm sorry, I can't keep track of the names. But this is Heller. Yeah, Heller is like, Silverman, for pity's sake, why are you doing this? For the sake of hate. Hate for your weak bodies of meat and blood. You have nothing of the grace and clean precision that machines know. So it's kind of, some cool ideas he's throwing around in there. Meanwhile, the cavalry arrives with this big giant laser beam, and they end up shooting Silverman and finally seemingly destroying him. And then as Heller's walking away, he's narrating, in the end, everything comes together. Or maybe, no, it's not. It's the omniscient narrator. The villain is overcome, the evil is vanquished, and the hero lives to fight another day. That's the way all good stories end, isn't it? But no! Silverman is still coming back. This is almost like the Terminator now, right? He just keeps coming back in a new form. Now he's basically like just a metallic chrome skeleton with spider legs, right? So that's where we are now, and that's the cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
So, Adam, what'd you think of this one?
Good. Probably the weakest of all the issues we've read, though, only because it's meant to set up the big conflict, which is going to be the final battle where we have Heller versus this, arachnid cyborg of Silverman. Like, honestly, like the United Front, I love that initial narration that was happening. And then after that, it just was set up for the final battle. So not the strongest. But with that said, being again a glorified ad for toys, very exceptionally written for that. And I am glad to see the artwork do a nice upgrade with this one, especially despite my grievances, that final shot of Silverman emerging as that skeletal cyborg arachnid combination, a very visceral and horrific image. Excellent stuff.
And I will say, although I have been critical of the art, this art is actually noticeably a step up, I think. It's actually pretty good, this issue. I don't know if it's just the inks. It's the same inker, Dave Hine, but the inks looks really good in this one. But anyway, Paul, what'd you think of this one?
Next.
It's all good, eh?
Yeah, I was thought that was nicely scary for the kids. You know?
Mhm.
I to be honest with you, I'm looking forward to giving my comment about the end of issue 50 and the beginning of 51.
Okay. So we're going to jump to Zoids and Spider-Man and Zoids, number 46. Now we've got Avengers on the cover. It has nothing to do with the Zoid story, so we're just going to jump right to it, and Adam's going to tell us what happens in this one.
Yeah, the opening sequences are really fascinating because we have these different panels, again, with art that's done by Steve Yeowell, and we have the skeletal visage and just the silhouette in shadow as the flames erupt behind Silverman. Now, Heller has this internal dialogue where he's thinking about flipping a coin. If it comes up tails, I stand my ground, and if it's heads, I turn around and start running from this abomination and don't ever stop. And it's just a nice conceit to start the story with this horrific skeletal android behind Heller. Well, he says, okay, it's your lucky day. And he spins around with a giant pipe of some sort in his hand and just whacks the head off of Silverman. I don't know what Silverman thought he was going to do. He's this rickety skeleton, and here comes Heller, pure A-grade beef American boy, like slapping him with this iron pipe and basically just decimating this thing. He's ripping him limb for limb. What I do appreciate is that he is so overcome with anger at this point and desperation. He just yells, "Die, Silverman, why won't you die?" And he keeps smacking and destroying. Finally, when it seems like there couldn't be any way for Silverman to return, his head sprouts tiny little arachnid legs and starts climbing towards him and bites him on the forearm. And I do like this contrast where Silverman, after being flung off his arm, is just saying, I hate you, like a sully teenager complaining to his parents. And that is taken over by Heller, who continues going, I hate you, as he stomps the ever-loving hell out of this damn skeleton cyborg head. And after seemingly whacking at it for minutes, it takes the other human compatriots of his to come over and pry him off. And there's this great panel that's on page 14 where he's just looking down wordlessly at what he did and just kind of overcome with the horror of like his loss of control, which I thought was very fascinating. Great characterization done in such a quick span of time. And we do get this shot on page 14 as well, this wide shot where we see his human compatriots over him trying to secure him, and we see the coin was flipped to heads. And if you recall, he looked at the coin when it was flipped. He said, if it's heads, I turn around. So, just clearly kind of like a great detail for the art, showing that without him actually saying it landed on heads. Like, that's just really good storytelling. And then we receive a series of epilogues, including Clark, including a Triceratops that's planning to usurp the control of the Red Zoids from Mammoth. And we have the last vestige of Silverman's consciousness as he goes, I hate you, just not even dialogue, just these little thought bubbles or thought squares as his arm twitches. And that's the end of that narrative.
I mean, what a great way to show that this battle will kind of just go on forever, right? I don't know what to say about it, but I love it. Paul, what do you think?
Good stuff, because it is good characterization. And the coin bit, a very nice touch. Yet another small but significant thing that elevates what could have just been routine stuff. Just to add these little details. I confess, I did have a little Monty Python Black Knight feeling. And I feel bad about that, because We've just all agreed this was nice, good writing by Grant Morrison, good touches, good characterization, and then some idiot says, well, it did remind me a little bit of the Black Knight in Monty Python and the Holy. Because why won't you die? Just a flesh wound.
I mean, a lot of this stuff pushes, it rides the line, right? It skirts the line of absurdity, but yeah, I see what you're saying. And even now that we're reviewing these all in a row rather than reading them, you kind of see the cycle of repetition. But again, if you erased all of the text and if you were to just read a plot summary, you'd be like, well, what exactly is happening in these issues? There's not much. Again, it's more just the way that the story is being told. I think it was Roger Ebert that said, it's never what a movie's about, it's how it's about it. And that I think explains what is so good about these Grant Morrison comics. It's how it's about it.
Yes, because even though I made the typical smart aleck comment about the Black Knight, I still liked it because it rode the line, as you said, but above the line, not below the line, you know? Because Grant Morrison is good, and therefore he still comes out, it all comes out ahead. With a poorer writer, it wouldn't have.
Good point.
I think also we're seeing characterization per your point, Paul, especially with it coming to Heller with this like traumatic moment where he's just so encumbered by this rage and by this desperation. You know what? I do agree. Like there is definitely a Black Knight sort of element to it, which is appropriate because he was piloting the Black Zoid, of course. But beyond that, even though it can delve very quickly into the ridiculous with like this weird tendrils coming out of this skull's bottom and climbing and biting somebody, that final sequence where he's uncontrollably whacking at this destroyed skull, to me, gives it a certain characterization that just excels beyond that. And I just think it's incredible within the state of just a few panels to go from a feeling of comedy to this real heavy sense that this character is experiencing some post-traumatic stress, experiencing trauma in a way that is so tangible. It's incredible. Yeah.
That's right. Yes. That's characterization, not just painting by numbers. And he beats up on the, on the villain and, yeah. Yep.
Okay, now we are going to jump to Spider-Man and Zoids number 47. This is a Spider-Man cover that's from an issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Got nothing to do with Zoids, so we're not going to talk about it. We're going to jump right inside to the story, and I think it's your turn, right, Adam?
I just said the last one, so if you want to read this.
I'll do this one. Okay, I forgot. Okay, so now look at this. We jump to a completely different storyline here. This reminds me of the opening of the film Aliens. We get a bunch of Marine-esque astronauts waking up from hypersleep in a spaceship, right? And they're basically being assembled by kind of like almost like a drill sergeant who's preparing them for their battle. Or for their mission. And then we have one smart-ass soldier that's like, Zoids, what is that? Some kind of disease? I'm clean, sir. And then, of course, he gets punched in the face. Oh, by the way, we should say the art is by Steve Yeowell again. Not sure to pronounce it, but Steve Yeowell. So anyway, this is kind of interesting because it's a great way to introduce the reader to how the humans at this time, how they see the Zoids and what they are. And so we learn that there's a planet called Zoidstar that circles the planet Corona Beta. It's a standard M-class Earth-type environment, which, of course, that designation was introduced in Star Trek, we all know. 5 continental landmasses, blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of cool. So then we're watching like video footage of something capturing footage of this Zoid. And so we see this Zoid approaching the camera, and we hear the people who are filming it, wait, it's moving, it's some sort of machine. So it's a classic trope in like a lot of sci-fi where or fantasy or horror where there'll be like footage of a monster or an alien that they have to go battle, and so they use that to brief everybody on the mission. I just think it's really cool. Then at the end, the sergeant or whatever says, that will be all for the moment, God bless America, right? And so then we cut over again, just like in Aliens, we cut over to these Marines having dinner in like the cafeteria or whatever you want to call it, the mess hall, playing cards, just bonding. And then we hear the U.S. anthem coming over, and one of the soldiers stands up. And I don't know. That's pretty much it. Again, almost ending like Aliens, where in Aliens it was Vasquez. Or no, was it Vasquez or one of the other characters was like, I just want to know one thing about these aliens, where they are. It kind of points your gun. In this story, it's a different character. One of them says, yeah, God bless America, man, and bring on the Zoids, and points his gun right at the reader. So there you go. So a whole new storyline has started, and I think it's awesome. Adam, what do you think?
I love this. This is, without question, my favorite issue we've read of Zoids.
Whoa, that's saying a lot.
Because it's just the writing. It's these characters' interactions. And yes, a lot is taken from Aliens. There's no way that you can discount that. But Morrison, again, has this talent of taking source material and doing amazing things with it, amazing characterization. We're seeing this great satire of, American military demands for power through this like very tongue-in-cheek way where the sergeant is going, God bless America. And then, of course, as the one person is repeating it when the national anthem's playing and then pointing a gun, what would be camera perspective at the reader. Like, it just shows that, that military industrial complex mentality of America and this lampooning of it. Not to mention there's like a lot of nods and winks I think Morrison is giving to the absurdity of Zoids. Like, even the character saying Zoids, it sounds like a disease. Sure. I think it's like Morrison basically being like, we know this is crazy. We know this is absurd.
Right.
And it gives a very human perspective. Paul, I think a while ago, you said something to the extent where Morrison deviated from Alan Moore, because Alan Moore wanted to bring the real world into comics, and then Morrison wanted to bring the real people into the world of comics. And I feel like that is somewhat happening here. The characterization's great. I'm already invested to know what's going to happen with these humans investigating this planet, and it left me smiling. The art was great. The characterization, the dialogue was clever. As I said, I think it's funny too. This is the most Zoidless of all the Zoid issues, and it's my favorite. Oh, and also I may just add very quickly, for the first time, I can't believe it's been 30 years and I've never seen Starship Troopers until this year. I definitely had Starship Trooper vibes from this.
Yes,
agree.
I did too.
Agree.
Yeah, that was a great film.
Oh, fantastic! Yes,
I just watched it this year. Yeah, it is good. Yeah. So, Paul, what'd you think of this one?
poor Mike. He's doing so best. So, okay, let me ask this idiot one more time.
No, I want to hear it.
Well, I love that line also about Zoids. What is it? A disease? That's great. I think Grant Morrison told himself that he's going to have fun with this, and he's going to do what he wants to do, because he has to, right? He has to. And so really that's a Grant Morrison kind of joke, isn't it? To have a character say exactly that, because it wouldn't surprise me if he told someone, hey, I've got this writing gig. I'm doing Zoids. Zoids, what's that, a disease? And he'd, oh, that's a great line. That's a great line. Oh, I've got to use that. So even for that alone, I'm quite honestly, seriously, even that little dialogue alone gives me a thumbs up.
And there's some more Morrison humor in this, like so the sergeant or whatever punches out, Sclater is his name, Sclater. He punches out one of the rookies, whatever you want to call him. And I love how a different guy later on when they're sitting eating food, he's like, God bless America. I mean, is he for real? And the guy says, his fist sure for real, man. It's just a funny way to address the fact that he was just punched in the face by this guy, right?
Yeah.
And then I also love how then another character says, wonder how he got that scar. What must have been a real bad wound. And the other character goes, are you kidding me? My kid brother just got one like it, $1.50 from an ad in the back of a comic book. There's just so much, there's so much.
See?
Right, yeah. It could have just been paint by numbers, exposition, but these characters have so much life to them. They're real people. They're really observing what's going on. They're questioning things that are going on, and it's giving us a different perspective. Because if it was just okay, red toys versus blue toys, blah blah blah. Like for example, do you remember Paul the miniseries Star Wars from the 80s?
You know what smart ass comment would I make here, Michael?
I don't know. What would you make?
Basically, but I tried to forget it.
Okay. It was horrible. And no offense, because I love Louise Simonson, but Star Wars. Okay, Adam, if you ever get a chance, read Star Wars. It's exactly what this could have been, and thank God it's not.
I will elect not to read that, but thank you.
Just read a couple pages, because this is the opposite of that, right? This is Star Wars. You can't even get through one issue, and we're just eating it up, right? Like I don't know. It's just amazing how bad some writers can be and how good some writers can be. And don't get me wrong, Louise Simonson did get better later. But anyway, this is how you do it. Adam, did you actually say anything about this one yet?
I did. I love it.
Okay. Yeah.
It's my favorite issue.
That's right. You did say something. Okay.
And
Yeah.
Something.
Why is it your favorite issue exactly? Adam, to be fair, I think that about 4 issues back, that was your favorite issue. Oh, that was your favorite issue up until that point. Now this is your favorite issue, right?
Yeah, I think it was my favorite issue for the art at that point. And I mentioned there was an issue that was my least favorite, but that was still good. This is just, it's good characterization, great dialogue. The art is on point. It's just great to be away from a bunch of robots blasting at each other and actually getting human interaction. We're getting a narrative, and it's fantastic.
It is.
It tells you so much about the writers. Like, do they have wit?
Yeah.
And if Grant Morrison has wit here, why don't other writers? So, just for example, and I feel terrible saying this, because when I was a teenager, mid-teen in the Mediterranean, Bill Mantlo, you know Bill Mantlo?
Yes. Very familiar.
He bothered to write me a personal postcard from the Marvel offices.
Wow.
And send it to me in Malta, which I still have. I really, really appreciated that. I really did. And of course, we know what terrible thing happened in his life, and
yes,
when he was struck, and that was basically the end of his life, although he's still alive. But if you think about Rom, Rom's toy, right? But I'm sorry, it has none of the wit of a Grant Morrison, for example.
You see, me and Mike, I think we're going to deviate because Mike and I talked about Rom before. I really enjoy the Rom series, but not for the same reasons I'm enjoying this. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, because Bill Mantlo wrote, I believe, I think he wrote the Transformers miniseries. The first, he didn't actually write number 1. He wrote 2, 3, and 4. He also wrote Micronauts, and then he did Rom.
Yes.
And they all, this is what I'm saying, is that I think Bill Mantlo is a guy that I think if you read him when you're a kid, I think he did put a lot of effort into it. He put a lot of passion. He also wrote Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man. I think that there's enough there that Rom does have a cult following. Micronauts has a cult following. I do think he's a good writer, but he's not anywhere near the level that Grant Morrison is. And I just think it's an example where sometimes a writer cannot have all the talent, but I think as long as they put passion into it or effort, that's why people enjoy Bill Mantlo, I think.
I enjoyed his supervillain team-up.
Okay.
Probably more than anything else. I also enjoyed his Champions with John Byrne, for example.
Okay.
And I enjoyed some of his Marvel team-up, I admit. Yeah, I think so. I think he had a lot of passion for it, and that's great. It just, I think the question I ask myself is a ridiculous one. Why do some writers have more wit than others? Is it really that hard to have this kind of wit? I think Steve Gerber had it so much, you know? And I think Chris Claremont, for example, didn't. And never has.
No argument there.
Wait, okay. One day we're going to have a Chris Claremont conversation, because I don't know where to place him on this list or whatever, I'll just say that I do, because right now I'm rereading some Chris Claremont. Like I've been rereading, say, X Factor by Louise Simonson, New Mutants by Louise Simonson, and then when I'm reading X-Men in Inferno, like the Inferno storyline, I am enjoying Chris Claremont much more than Louise Simonson or any of the other writers. So I definitely think there's something there.
Yes.
It's kind of just like the Lord of the Rings films. I don't think the Lord of the Rings films are good, but what I do appreciate about them is they take themselves so seriously that they kind of can't help but be good in a way.
Impressive,
yes, yes, exactly. And so that's what I think Chris Claremont is. Chris Claremont, he puts so much passion into his best work that it's hard not to at least appreciate that aspect of it. But you're right. When he tries to do humor in Excalibur, oh my God, it falls flat. I actually said online on a Facebook page that it was excruciating, and Chris Claremont responded. He put ouch. I was like, don't worry, Chris.
I remember.
Yeah, you remember that. And he's like, I
Yes,
still
I
love your
remember.
work. Yeah, it was, oh boy, I kind of regretted that. But anyway, that's a,
there's some, I think to this point, and I'll just wrap up the conversation by saying there's some writers who are exceptional for these detailed narratives and these narrative like permutations they can have. I think Claremont came up with a lot of great interwoven narratives, but lacked the sort of prose style to make it seem as profound, as multi-layered as he was trying to get for a narrative. Whereas you have Morrison, for example, with that previous issue we just talked about, there's hardly a narrative. You just have Marines being told they're going to a planet for Zoids, and yet it's so much richer because the prose is there. And I think that's the wit Paul is talking about. It's the fact that you can make something come through with that prose in a way where you can have a threadbare plot, but it comes across as so much more substantial than something that has plot twist after interwoven like narrative after whatever twist is going to happen. There's something about a talented writer who can make something profound out of seemingly nothing.
That's a good point. Go ahead.
Sorry, I must just say one last thing about Chris Claremont, which is the opposite of what I just said in a way. Because he responded to you, Michael, on Facebook and said, ouch. And then you know, you felt bad. You felt
Yes.
bad. Oh my God, Chris Claremont has replied to me directly, ouch. But I said on also some post that I thought the best single issue he ever did was a standalone issue of New Mutants. It was like number 41 or something like this.
Okay.
And I just thought, and I think I wrote that I thought this was the best writing he ever did. And he responded directly to me to thank me for seeing that and highlighting that. And I felt good about that. So now I feel bad saying what I said.
Sure.
You know.
But I got to give Claremont credit because I've met John Byrne and I've met Chris Claremont. And
Yes.
Chris Claremont is such a gentleman. I think he's so humble in a way. Like he knows that he's famous. He knows that he's, rich. But he's so classy to me. And so just that alone, even just the way he responded to me, right? Like do you have Howard Chaykin on Facebook?
I spent one-on-one time with Howard Chaykin at his house in the Hollywood Hills.
Are you kidding me?
No. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What should we save that for another time? I guess we should, eh?
I guess so. Otherwise,
Okay.
This will be the never-ending podcast.
2 hour, 5 hour.
Yeah, we
podcast.
have only 3 Zoids left to go,
Yeah,
so
okay.
we better Zoid on it.
We'll talk about Howard Chaykin another time. But anyway, okay. So where are we here? We're going to jump to the next issue.
We're 48.
Whose turn is it? Is it your turn, Adam, or mine?
You know what? I'll give this one a go. And this
Sure.
one is essentially another epilogue for the big battle that took place with the Black Zoid. We're gone with the Space Marine, with the American Army scene. We're back to the planet where the Zoids inhabit. And we're really seeing the outcome, the fallout of the big battle. We're, of course, seeing Heller with his taped ribs, having to ingest medicine, and just looking at everything that has happened, the desolation of the land, the scraps of Zoid just left all over the landscape. And, of course, most damaging of all, his son. Griff has survived, but his mind has been severely damaged by being augmented with Zoidzilla. And so a main thrust of this narrative is him basically fighting it out of this comatose state where he's dreaming that he's entrapped within Zoidzilla. Now, this is interspliced with some interesting features of Krark, as we talked about before, where Krark flies to the polar twilight to collect the new red Zoid mutants. How a Zoid can be a mutant, I do not know, but the mutants they are coming from asteroids falling to the ground like big hot eggs. Now, as we cut between this and, again, the narrative with the humans, we're having this really interesting layout on page 6, where we're seeing on the left-hand side these tinged blue panels where we're having Griff actually experience his dreamscape as if he was Zoidzilla and all these battles he's encountered. While on the right side, with standard coloring, we have Heller entering into the sick bay and discussing with the other humans and with Namor what's going to happen with his son. And he's desperate. He's asking for Griff to just fight against it, to fight against whatever is keeping him from awakening. But it seems like it's for naught, because the next page, we end up having this conflicting dialogue where he is both imagining he's Zoidzilla, but then we have this incredible close-up where he's within the carapace, within the cockpit of Zoidzilla, just smashing his hands against the glass, screaming, "No, get me out of here. I'm Griff Heller, get me out." So you have this almost type of, not body horror, but mind horror happening, where he is trying to reclaim his sense of identity away from his fusion with Zoidzilla. This cuts back to the scenes, however, where Krark has been waiting for these new mutant red Zoids to emerge from their eggs, and they hatch like a bunch of baby chickens dripping with goo, and that's how the issue ends. A minor nitpick. Zoids hatch from eggs?
You know what? I didn't even blink. I didn't even think twice.
It's really not the weirdest thing that happens in the series. I understand. It threw me for a loop a little bit. Like the idea of these being mutant Zoids, this is my one moment where I go, that's not what a mutant is.
Sure.
But be that as it may, the struggle that Griff is going through is incredible. I love the imagery of him physically encased within Zoidzilla's cockpit that he can't escape from, the turmoil as Heller is trying to deal with his own injuries, the fallout of the battle, the fallout of what's happened to his child, the stuff that's happening with Krark and with these mutant red Zoids. It's just preamble for what's going to be happening for future storylines, but still very engaging. Again, the human elements is what is interesting about the story, and great artwork in this issue as well.
The other thing I have to mention, again, I don't know how much of this lore. I'm going to assume that this was all thought of by the writers, because we know that with G.I. Joe and Transformers, Marvel was hired by Hasbro to create everything. Like Larry Hama came up with Cobra. Larry Hama came up with all the names, all the file cards. Same thing with between Jim Shooter, Denny O'Neil, and Bob Budiansky. They came up with all the characters and personalities. So I can only assume that Grant Morrison or someone, Richard Allen, came up with the Zoid Star and all that stuff. It could have just been a regular planet. It could have just been like Earth. But just adding that extra touch of a blue star, I'm watching a blue moonrise. Everything looks bleached and unreal, like the Chinese watercolor mom used to have in the bathroom, like the ghost of a landscape. It's almost beautiful. Oh my God. Like, again, Grant Morrison
great writing.
Did not need to do that. But just to add that extra element to this toy tie-in is incredible. So, it's funny because as we're reading these, I'm like, no, this is my favorite issue. No, this is my favorite issue. Well, now this one with the split narrative and like the nightmare, like you said, almost the body horror. I think this one now it could be my favorite issue. So yeah, I can't say enough about it. Paul, what'd you think of this one?
Same as I thought of all the other ones, like you just read.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, as I say, almost too good for Zoids.
Yeah. I don't know what to say. So Paul had to leave Adam had to leave for a moment. But as we're waiting for Adam to get back, do you think you would have enjoyed this as a kid, or would this kind of, I don't want to say gone over your head, but do you think you would have appreciated it?
What age, kid?
Oh, 10. We'll say 10 years old.
I think I would have enjoyed it, and I think by that point I would have appreciated this great description or descriptive work by Grant Morrison. I don't think that would have gone over my head. I think I would have felt that that's a good development in my reading, you know?
Yes, that's a good point. And the thing is I write too, and even reading this, I mean, I don't want to say, this sounds really arrogant, but I'm at the point now where I can only read things, I don't want to say that I can learn from, but I hate to say it, but as anyone who's our age, you can read things written by 22-year-olds that well, I know I can write better than this. There's comics, like, and I just want to use this as an example because it's so funny. What's his name? The editor of Spider-Man in the mid-'80s.
Shooter?
Christopher Priest, who used to be called Jim Owsley.
Jim Owsley.
As far as I know, he became the editor of Spider-Man when he was 19.
Yes.
I was working at Taco Bell when I was 19.
Yes, yes.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, he has written some really good comics, but with the Spider-Mans that he was writing when he was 19, I can safely say that I could write better than those Spider-Man comics, I think. I think we can all probably say that. So reading these comics now, my mind is blown. I'm assuming Grant Morrison must have been 20s, early 20s probably. Uh-huh. These comics are great though. Like they're not just for early 20-year-old, for a 23-year-old. These are great for any age level or skill level. Like these are great comics, as we said. So anyway, when you left out and we were saying if we read this as a kid, would we have enjoyed it? What do you think if you would have read this when you were 10 years old or something?
I would have been horrified.
Okay. But would you have appreciated the quality?
No, I'll put it very bluntly, because I am self-aware enough to say as a child, I was very dumb. I did not appreciate good narrative stories. I did not appreciate the finer parts of storytelling. I was like, yeah, I just want to bash two plastic action figures together, and that's my narrative. Although I shouldn't say that, because then I think about the Transformers animated film, which even as a child, I thought I was critical of, but then there was stuff like, oh, this is dealing with mortality, and this is dealing with, how we adapt to change. Okay, so maybe I wasn't as dumb as I thought, but it's a giant robot dinosaur laden story. I would have loved that. As for the human aspect, I think I would have found the idea of this trauma the character is going through, the grief they're experiencing, interesting. Maybe young Adam would not be able to articulate why he found it interesting, but definitely there is something appealing to it. But this is, I think, underscoring the main point. It has the superficial elements that a child would enjoy. As adult readers, we're getting stuff of merit from this. So I think this is really transgenerational in that way.
Great point. I'll agree with that. Okay, so now we're going to jump to, that was 48. Now we're jumping to...
49. And this is interesting. I was mentioning the Transformers movie, which was nothing but a glorified means to have new action figures promoted. This issue is basically the same thing.
Yes. So yeah, we are, do you want to do this one, or it's my turn, so I can do this one? Okay. So yes, we're introduced to these new characters. Who are you? I asked them. They regard me with the sullen red fires of their eyes, these new red mutants. So again, new Toylon. It was probably a new year for the company. Okay, Grant, fit these new toys into your story. Do it however you want. And then we're introduced to Hellcat, Scarab, and Snake. I don't know who's coming up with these names, but they're awesome, right? So yeah, and by the way, the art is Steve Yeowell again, and I think it's awesome. We're getting some nice perspective shots of Zoidzilla looking down at the humans, which is very cool. We're getting a nice close-up of Zoidzilla's face. So this is following up the last issue, and even though I just read this yesterday, I can't really remember what happens in this one, other than they're kind of just talking about, because he's still in kind of this dream state, isn't he? Like,
yes, in fact, there's a bit of dialogue that I find is interesting that we're seeing it through the point of view of Zoidzilla's intelligence, and he looks down at the humans and goes, aliens. But then, of course, Griff is looking through the cockpit screen and goes, father?
yeah,
So
Dad, yeah.
Yeah, Dad. So you're having this battle between the two consciousness.
Uh-huh. And then we even see Zoidzilla looking down at the humans saying, let them burn in the heat of my gaze. And then we have that awesome shot of the head just looking down at the four little humans. It's a great shot. Again, I would have loved Grant Morrison to have written Transformers, but we never got that, but that's okay. So then we cut back over to the new Red Mutants or whatever they're called. And again, it serves two purposes. This is hyping up these cool new toys. Hellcat stalks the ice fields, testing his strength. Snake winds his way down a snowbank like a trickle of molten silver laced with red. But it's also good writing, so it's enjoyable to read it, right? So we're getting a really good, basically, toy commercial. And then we get who's the one that's recruiting them? It's
Oh, that's my favorite, Clark.
Krark. So, and then at this point in the story, Krark's like overhead scarab whirs through the jeweled night, eclipsing the moon. They will serve me well. So, it's almost like this is like another level. Now we're getting. It's like how to do a good commercial. Like this is a commercial for toys that's also being enjoyed by us 40-something-year-olds 30 years later. It's just amazing.
It's the sexiest toy commercial I've ever read.
Uh-huh. So we get back to the conflict, like Adam mentioned, between what's the guy's name again?
Oh, well, it's Griff, his son, and then Zoidzilla as he's looking down at all the humans, yeah.
Right. And so we see this like worm's eye view looking up at Zoidzilla. You must obey me. I'm Zoidzilla. Destroy them. Griff, it's me. But it's my dad, Rollo. Destroy them. So they're, conflicting back and forth. And then in reality, he wakes up and he's like, who are you? And so I guess, so I don't remember this, but the implication is that he's lost his memory, right? Even though I don't even remember that.
Yeah, and it's paired with this shot of him actually in the dreamscape shattering the cockpit screen of Zoidzilla, which is him breaking free. The shattering, of course, could also be his shattered consciousness.
Right. So then we cut back just to a little epilogue with all the red mutants. I am Crank, Prince of Darkness. I come to lead you. The sun begins to rise. Morning draws blood from the heavens. It is an omen, for I am Krark, Prince of Darkness. My day is dawning. My time has come, and I shall lead my army to the stars. So again, a great cliffhanger, not a literal cliffhanger, but Grant Morrison does this a lot, where they'll set up something, a threat, almost like the first issue of New X-Men, when the issue just ends with Cassandra Nova giving her agenda for the whole issue just to drive home the point of how dangerous she's going to be. Like, what a great way to introduce a group of characters. But anyway, that's that issue. And once again, I thought it was really good. Paul, what did you think?
2 thumbs up.
All right. On to you, Adam.
It's good. It's, again, a glorified toy commercial, more so than the other issues, but prose is great. I do like the little outcome of what happens with Griff. Excellent stuff. It's a shame, though, that Morrison will never wrap that up. We will not see Morrison's wrap-up of the relationship between Griff and Heller, nor of what happens with the Zoids, because we're now at the final Morrison-penned issue, number 50, Spider-Man in the Zoids. And this one, on the front cover, is Spider-Man being beaten by the man called Manslaughter. We don't care. So we're moving on to Zoids.
That's right. You're quite right. We really don't.
And this is interesting because much like the Marine issue, we're not really in the main conflict or with the main characters. I really do get the feeling that Morrison understood this was their last issue of Zoids, and they simply said, let me do what I want to. So here we have a character who's abandoned on Zoidstar, who's with Charlotte, which is the shard skeletal remains of this person's partner who was their co-pilot. We then see the remnants of a ship that has been abandoned on this planet. I do want to mention, though, the 5-year-old in me is giggling that on page 3, the side of the ship calls it the ASS Palomar. So
yes.
Palomar.
Huh.
But anyway, that's my juvenile side. We end up seeing in the next sequence these weird macaroni sperm like mitochondria looking aliens, which are just like amorphous and change shape and have a single eye, and they are going around engaging with a Zoid. Basically the Zoid engages it in battle, tries to blast it, but it has no effect on these aliens, and they just basically cause the Zoid to explode, showing this sort of omnipresent power which they have, which is pretty cool. After that, what we have is a return to the scene where this person, whose name is revealed to be Schumacher, is just recounting what had happened, about how the ship had been blasted down and how it's been a year since him and Charlotte have emerged from the wreckage. Of course, him surviving, Charlotte not, and just showing the denigration of his mental capacity, the madness he's delved into, reflecting upon burying the bodies of the rest of the crew and still talking to the skeleton. He even says at one point, "You'd go stark raving mad, wouldn't you?" to the skeleton of Charlotte, which is just incredible and dark. Then it begins to rain, and he says to Charlotte, "It's time to go inside, otherwise you'll catch your death." Again, showing the decline of his mental state. But then these strange amorphous aliens show up again. The art is done by another artist. We'll talk about this in a moment. On page 6, there's this really interesting sequence where one of the aliens appears to have a mouth and a single eye, and it's looking disdainfully at Schumacher, basically saying it's time to prepare the game. So what happens are that these strange aliens encompass him and apparently are absorbed into Schumacher. At least that was the interpretation that I had. So they've either disappeared or they've been absorbed into him. It's left ambiguous, but he turns around and he sees, no, they mustn't. Someone please stop them, as he's banging against the hull. Something has happened, something that has traumatized him further. He yells at the skeleton, "Don't you understand, Charlotte? They're playing a game, a stupid game." And I wonder if this is some sort of pointed comment by Morrison just about the futility of this war that's going on in the universe, but basically just saying how all of us are just toys to them, which is another great nod and a witticism by Morrison reflecting on this whole campaign of writing for Zoids. And the final line of Morrison's run is, "Nothing but toys, and God help us all. The game's about to begin," as this character looks at a single chess piece left on a board. And that concludes everything Morrison has written for Zoids.
Okay, I'll just say a couple things. First, I think this is actually the best art of the series so far. This art is by Phil Gascoine. Paul, are you familiar with Phil Gascoine? I don't think I've ever heard of him, but this art is your mic. Oh, I don't know if you're trying to talk. We can't hear you, Paul. Honestly. There we go.
Because I muted.
Okay, good.
How do you spell it?
It's PhilGascoine.
Gascoine.
Gascoine. Have you heard of him before?
Phil Gascoine?
Yeah.
Yes.
Phil Gascoine. No, I can't say I have.
Okay.
Paul Gascoine is very famous, but not Phil. But Paul is. Oh, wait a second. Phil Gascoine. He's dead.
Okay.
Very appropriate for this issue.
Yeah.
He died in 2007.
I don't mean to laugh. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. It's great. We've only just heard of him. Oh, he's dead.
Yeah.
He was born in 1934. So when he was drawing this stuff, he was in his 50s.
Well, look, this to me is classic comic book art. The line work is incredible. And it's not the kind of style you see much anymore, unfortunately, but the line work is incredible. The angles are changing. The storytelling is good. I guess the closest artist that I can think of would be someone like Timothy Truman. You guys familiar with Timothy Truman, who did Hopgood?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, great line work here, and of course, this split narrative, the guy talking to the corpse, a bizarre science fiction idea of almost like these floating spermazoids. Like, it's just a weird science fiction story, but it still does tie in with the Zoids. And I like to see sort of like when these writers in their younger years foreshadowed ideas that they would use later on. I love the fact that this is almost like Grant Morrison's Animal Man thing, where Animal Man realizes he's a comic book character. In this story, the main character is like, all of us, you, me, we're just toys to them. It's kind of a play on the fact that he's writing a toy comic. Why not, right? So I don't know. Again, this isn't my favorite issue, but the art is definitely my favorite one, and it's another really good, almost standalone one. And unfortunately, it is standalone because it's the last issue Grant Morrison did. So, Paul, what do you think?
Well, I want to say about, I feel embarrassed about us not knowing about Phil Gascoine, because he apparently drew a lot of the strips in the weekly, British comics were very weekly, and military World War II stuff and things like that. But he also drew The Punisher.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay.
And he drew Shade the Changing Man for DC.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, these are worthy, worthy notes, I think. So, I feel like we should know him, really, not just discover that he's dead. But anyway.
Good point.
Yeah, great Grant Morrison stuff. Like you said, the nice little jokes about toys, we're just toys to them, and all of this stuff. Can that bring us now to issue 51?
If you want to talk about 51, I don't have the issues here, but yeah, you can talk about 51.
It's okay. I've only got one thing to say.
Okay.
Because even though we were reviewing 40 to 50, all the Grant Morrison issues, I couldn't prevent myself taking a peek at 51.
Sure.
And it's so funny because even though I knew, of course, Grant Morrison finished with 50, we're finishing with 50. I looked at 51, saw the credits, and thought, hell no, I'm out of here now.
Yeah. So you didn't read it?
I read like the first 2 pages.
Okay. And it wasn't good, you're saying?
I just immediately just seemed to be painting by numbers. Immediately.
Gotcha.
And the serious point here is, the first 2 pages of the first Grant Morrison that I read for this evening, immediately those first 2 pages, wow, you already got me. You already got me in the first 2 pages. You got the bubble or the droplet. You've already got me in the first 2 pages of 51. I'm out of here. Yeah. There's nothing enlightening here. There's no wit. No, it's just standard stuff. Mm-hmm. It's wallpaper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Adam, what do you think?
I agree. I did actually read 51 as well, because that's actually the final issue.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And it's done by the Allens, as I like to call them. So we have art that I don't think is horrible by Steve Allen, and then Richard Allen did the plot, although it doesn't actually say anything in terms of dialogue or in terms of the script itself, just plot. Oh, no, I'm sorry. My apologies. Steve Allen did write the script. It was Richard Allen who plotted it out.
Okay.
The art was by John Ridgway, which I should have known just from looking at it. My apologies for that.
I love John Ridgway, yep.
Yeah, so, artistically, it's fantastic, but it is very, when something is written, trying to come across as profound and as really intelligent, but it just comes across as pompous. That's what I'm getting with this. Obviously, trying to write off the coattails of the greatness of what Morrison did and just failing at it. And failing spectacularly, because all it does become is, you use the phrase paint by numbers, it is just simply giant robots hitting each other and then setting up another battle. It's not ineffective in itself, but when we said those previous issues worked as both something that would appeal to children and for us in our respective ages being able to read it, this does not. This is just, if I was a child or maybe a teenager reading it, maybe I would have appreciated it more. Right now, 51 is nothing, and it ends without any sort of continuation of the plot points that were written by Morrison either. That's something else to consider. So this is all just left for what would be the monthly Zoids comic coming thereafter, which I don't know if we would ever get into, but Only if it was with another competent writer, because at this point, it just feels like it's going to become a generic space opera.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, like I said, I did actually. Did you go back and read the the first issue of this, Adam? Like when we did our first batch, because I did.
No, to be honest, I did not. I never managed to get that far. I only read this and the issues that we covered, plus 51.
Sure. I do remember the Richard Allen stories being good, but I'm going to read 51 just to contrast it with the Grant Morrison stories. But for now, that's all we have to say about the Zoids. And so I think it's safe to say that none of us are going to necessarily run out and buy Zoids toys. But I think we'll all agree that this is kind of a lost, like a hidden gem. Nobody talks about this comic. I mean, I don't even know if it's ever been reprinted. Right? Like there's collections of Grant Morrison's early work. There's collections of Zenith. There's collections of whatever. But I don't think this will ever be collected because Marvel probably doesn't have the rights, right? So
I will say it was collected, but only for a UK printing.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. So I guess that's all we have to say about Zoids. We're all Grant Morrison fans, right? We're not Zoids fans necessarily. There's going to be more Grant Morrison comics coming up in a few episodes. But before we get to that, next week, we're going to be jumping back to Neil Gaiman, and we're going to be talking, this is going to be fun. We're going to be talking about Neil Gaiman's take on a few classic Batman villains. I don't know if you remember, Neil Gaiman did some issues of Secret Origins, and Neil Gaiman covered the origin of, oh boy, from memory, was it Poison Ivy, I think? I should probably know this because it's in our review next episode, and I think the Riddler, so it'll be a fun one. So definitely be sure to check that out, everybody. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. So yeah, almost every 2 weeks we release an episode of UK Corral. So be sure to join us. Hopefully, Paul and Adam, you can both join us for the next one.
I hope so.
Okay. All right. So there you go. That's it. Thank you for joining me, guys. Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll pick up the Howard Chaykin discussion next week. And until the next time, see you later.